A lot of companies, sales and marketing are like cats and dogs. They have disparate goals. They have disparate compensation systems. They don't share blame. They don't share accountability. They don't share the victories and together. And I think, to me, what I've learned through the years, whether it's here or other places, is just comes down to having a shared goal.
Welcome to RevOps Champions, a podcast designed for revenue professionals looking to advance sales and marketing initiatives through the role of RevOps within their organizations. In each episode, we feature leaders who are leveraging technology to drive operational efficiency, revenue, and improve the customer experience. Listen in and learn how to become a better RevOps leader within your own organization. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of RevOps Champions. I'm very happy today to have with me Brian McLaughlin, CEO of Alula. I'm going to kick it right off by asking you, Brian, firstly, what exactly does Alula do? Who do you do it for, and how did you end up there as CEO?
Well, first of all, Brendon, thanks for having me on today. I very much appreciate it. Alula is a leading provider of smart security technology. We build end-to-end vertically integrated technology for security and home automation dealers across the globe. Most of our focus is in North America, but we now work with over 5,000 security, home automation, other types of technology integrators and dealers to really provide a differentiated, a fresh alternative to the technology solutions they've had in the past. So I joined now coming up on 4 years ago, and joined the team from another great company, Trimble, and was headed up the transportation group there. Knew very little about security at that point in time, but knew a lot about the underlying SaaS platform capabilities that were behind the model. And it's been an incredible 4 years for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, met you a few weeks ago, through our good friend Chad Eckes. One of the things I realized as I was sort of looking into Alula a little bit more is, and in fact, I never told you this, but very early in my career, when I was still living in South Africa in my mid-20s, with security is a big issue in South Africa, and I in fact considered starting a security company, but it was more sort of the physical home protection piece with alarms and systems and whatever. But just looking into it again in the US, it's a huge but very fragmented market. And what struck me about Alula was the fact that you've sort of gone this B2B approach by the looks of it, which is again very different to what most consumers out there are seeing currently when it comes to security.
Yeah, there's a number of different ways to attack the market, and to your point, security right now is of peak interest to consumers with all the unrest that's out there and kind of the craziness that's out in the world. More and more people are wanting to fortify their homes, but also to automate those. So we feel like we're in a good position from a demand perspective, and our path to market is really focused on the end users that want to work with a professional to implement and support the life safety system. There'll be a lot of folks that choose to do it themselves, especially when you're talking about maybe a point solution like a camera or a smart plug or things of that nature. But if you're talking about a full-blown end-to-end life safety system, that's where our partners really play a valuable role, is not only to install it, but to support it. And what we're finding is that even if you go DIY for maybe a part of the solution, over time, if you really want to embrace an end-to-end life safety system, you'll typically work with a partner to help make sure that it's done properly and that it's there for you if you do have that emergency situation that none of us really ever want to have.
Yeah. That's interesting because I see a lot of parallels, in our market, the sort of business technology implementation space. It sounds like you haven't used the word yet, integrated, but that's essentially what you're offering, is sort of a fully integrated system where a lot of people are currently just buying those, as you say, point solutions. But eventually, if you need an integrated system, you're probably going to need some help.
Yeah, and that's where most people end up. Most people will dabble and start with one piece of the value. Again, we really offer vertically integrated from the security intrusion side, all the way to the home automation side, all the way over to the video monitoring, capabilities that are really becoming more and more popular. And we put those all together for residential uses, but also small business and commercial fire applications. So we're extending our markets, growing across a number of different areas, but really focused on the same core technology platform so we can scale properly.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure and you also mentioned the SaaS component, which of course is really interesting to me too, but I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit later. So, Brian, what is the biggest challenge you had to deal with as a business in the last 2 or 3 years? And, again, I'm sure there have been a number of challenges. No business leader that I speak to or anybody else speaks to has ever had, plain sailing. And I'm sure there's a lot of challenges you've had that some that you would prefer not to talk about. But what are 1 or 2 big challenges that you've overcome in the last 2 or 3 years that you would share?
Yeah, I think that the 2 biggest historically, one is moving from a hardware-centric company to a SaaS platform-centric company, and there's a lot of components in the shift there that we've had to overcome as a team. The second is really going from a fraction of a percentage point of market share to being someone that our dealers can trust and utilize and embrace as a core provider for their technology offerings. So becoming relevant to the market, right? We play in the land of giants. We have some very big and prominent and wonderful competitors out. They have that have much more capital and much larger technology teams and much bigger brands than we do. But we've been able to work our way up but entering the market, building that brand, getting our name out there, being relevant to the market. I think that's been another big one. Most recently, certainly, COVID demand last year and supply chain this year has certainly been our biggest challenges to overcome. But every new day is different and exciting, and lots of things to work to overcome for business leaders. I'm sure you're familiar with that as well. Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. This move from, whether it's hardware to software or analog to automated, whatever you want to call it, and you can obviously dig much deeper depending on whatever industry you're in. But that's obviously been a monumental shift, and there doesn't seem to be any looking back for the most part. Technology is just one of those things that is why humans progress. And I often use the analogy that we moved from the Stone Age to the Iron Age, not because we ran out of stones, right? That's right. The same way that you saw the future of SaaS in this space, not because the hardware didn't work anymore, but just the SaaS might be better in many applications. Then when you and I chatted, Brian, you talked about one of the pillars of your success, that you are masters of translation. Can you speak more about that? This started well before I got to Alula. Alula is really the merger of 2 great companies, Resolution Products out of Hudson, Wisconsin, and IP Datatel out of Houston, Texas. And the founders and teams of each of those companies built select components of the platform. Resolution more on the hardware side, IP Datatel on the IP-centric networks. And the Alula vision was to put it all together and again, create this vertically integrated platform. The translation components of that have really existed, well deep into prior to the merger of the 2 companies. And it really is focused around the fact that there's 25 to 30 million installed home security systems that are out there. And you throw on top of that, pure home automation systems, and you're reaching probably close now to 32 to 35% market penetration. To go in as a dealer and try to say, okay, I want you to rip out all that stuff that you just put into your home and put my system in is an extreme barrier to entry, a real big conversion challenge. And so the engineers, the great engineers at the companies that now I have a chance to lead, really put together their heads and said, why don't we remove that barrier and start to go look at this differently, look at the problem differently. And the problem is people want updated, fresh technology, but they don't want to have to rip out all the infrastructure that's there. Just because it's costly, you have to repair your home, there's all kinds of things to that. So the teams built these devices called translators, and communicators that plug into existing infrastructure and basically take over an existing home security system and allow it to upgrade and modernize and look just like a brand new system without having to remove tape from the walls or remove all the wiring that's behind all the drywall throughout your house. It was an incredibly brilliant invention and capability. It was really put together by the teams here at Alula, again, many years ago. And we've really carried that forward to today. As we look at the market, we're always looking to say, how can we help our dealers, remove those barriers to switching? For so many smaller companies, emerging companies, you deal with these very large incumbents, right? And the big is great, but it also can lead to them being slow. It also can lead to them maybe resting on their laurels. And if we can outmaneuver them and we can find inventive ways to solve a market challenge like, through translation or other, I think there's a way that you can win there. And we've been able to pick our spots to battle and to win, and that's been one of them certainly through the years here at Alula.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's so interesting to, you were speaking about a very specific industry, but again, the parallels across all industries are, so clear where, you talked about incumbents and, you often see people do the comparison of Wall Street, for example, like, who were the biggest companies on Wall Street, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, and who are the biggest companies now, and then who will be the biggest companies in 10 years from now, or even 3 or 5 years from now. And again, it's just, everything's being replaced by technology, which is why this whole, topic is so fascinating. And again, it's, whether no matter what industry you're in, there's some value in this, for you.
Yeah, we're even seeing it now. We're looking at changing our payroll platform. And, we've been using the industry giant for some number of years. There's some great new competitors. And the thought was always, well, it's way too hard to switch, right? It's so deeply integrated into our platform. And all the data hooks are there, and all, they've got all it, there's no way we could possibly ever switch, which is exactly what that provider wants. But these newer players come in with, here's a playbook. Here's 15 of the customers that converted. Here's how you can do that in a cost-effective manner. They make it, I won't say easy to change, but much easier to change and to translate, right? That's really what it's about, is that easing and reducing the barriers to switching. That's a big part, I think, of anybody in this emerging space that we play in currently, or the payroll providers that are out there as well.
Right. And again, of course, this, if you think about this, the space that I keep coming back to is really the digital transformation space, right? So we're all transforming or helping to transform different industries, different parts of how the world works. And one of the things that we see in the digital transformations that we do, where we're taking businesses from what we call their legacy systems onto, and transforming how they use technology and how they centralize their teams and tech stacks and data, et cetera. There's a tipping point at which the pain of using the old system is just too great. Right. But often it does, have to be pointed out to certain, business leaders, because if they're not aware of the possibilities and not aware of the current cost to their business, not just in hard dollars, but in how their people are operating or not. In other words, the frustration that comes from internal teams and customers when they're dealing with a company who is not using the latest and best technology. That really is where the rubber meets the road today. If you are a customer-focused business, which of course we kind of hope that all businesses are, right?
Yep.
So let's moving on. So Brian, you also talked about how you've made the shift and helped others make the shift from hardware to software. And this is obviously going to be, we all have a lot of work to do in the spaces that we are helping our respective customers make these shifts. Is that something you could elaborate more around the move from hardware to software?
Yeah, and this is something I've had some experience in doing it, not only here, but in my prior company. And I've learned a lot what to do and what not to do through the years in terms of how to do it well and how not to do it well. But, I think it starts with kind of a cultural transformation, right? You have to make sure that you've got the team aligned around wanting to be a SaaS business, a service-oriented business versus a hardware-centric business or a true engineering business. And I think that's a big mindset shift, that you have to make sure you have the right team that's in place to do it. You have to make sure you have the right skill sets that are there. And that you've got, again, kind of that guiding light that okay, here's where we're heading. We are going to become a SaaS platform. And for us at Alula, we still were going to have hardware components, but they were going to be a means to an end. If the hardware wasn't driving a recurring revenue subscription, then we're not going to do it anymore. And that was blasphemy in the early days of discussions on our strategy, because it was a big change for the focus of the business. But I think the team aligned around the vision and direction where we were going and understood the benefits of doing that. Again, recurring revenue, stickier, more value for the customer, better technology for the customer, allows us to disrupt some of the prior models that are out there. There's so many different benefits of heading that direction. People got aligned, and we made sure that we had the right team in place as well. We were able to really embrace a lot of both founders are still on board to this day of the prior companies, and a lot of, the prior leaders are there. But we also brought in some new leadership that really had a lot of SaaS focus to be able to bring those collective pieces together and drive that cultural transformation. And that also then led into making sure that our metrics were evolving, right? It wasn't just about hardware price and hardware sales and, just revenue, but now we're started talking metrics like, subscriber acquisition costs and CAC and looking at, obviously the value of a customer and ARPU and churn, and those being the most important. And when we'd have conversations, we'd teeter back into, okay, looking at the hardware elements, we've shifted our focus, right? We looked at our roadmap, we looked at our objectives, our quarterly objectives, our rocks that we put forth. All these things led to really this mindset transformation across the business, and that was a big part of it. And I think, ultimately it came down to then casting that out to the front end. We had to change the message to the market. So our marketing and our selling and our operations had to start acting and thinking and communicating with more, SaaS overtones of a service provider and not a hardware provider. So we'd look at our website. We used to have a catalog. A catalog typically is going to show you a bunch of hardware. We moved it, to a service offering overview. The whole website transformed, showing the experience side of things much more so than any one individual component. Our operations team, our customer support team, began to look at evaluation processes and how do we measure evaluations of our platform, not the hardware, but the end-to-end capabilities. And how can we get a customer within 30 days to try our end-to-end experience and then give us that feedback and transform. So it was really from the beginning, the nomenclature, the metrics, the core beliefs of the business, of what kind of business are we in. And that's, it's still ongoing. We're still transforming. I don't think you ever get all the way there unless you start that way day one. But we're well into the journey, and I think we've got some great aligned leadership around this. And I've got a great team of leaders that are really driving this each and every day.
Yeah. And of course, just picking up on that last part of the fact that you've never really done transforming, and this is one of the things that, of course, technology is doing because of the velocity, the continuing increased velocity of change that happens because of technology, which of course drives progress, but it also drives change, which of course can be very uncomfortable until you've made the change. And as I was speaking on an episode or two ago with our friend Chris Heim, we also talked about the sort of the Jeff Bezos Amazon approach of it's always day one, because if you're not thinking about your business that way, then on day two there's going to be someone who's going to replace you. Right. So you need to replace yourself before a competitor does. Right. And of course the other thing that things that you talked about there, which are very common to any industry really, even though they might not be using terms like CAC and LTV, you talk about SAC, which of course is a part of that metric model, but CAC and LTV is very common to pretty much any business, even though most legacy type industries don't think about CAC and LTV the same way that technology companies do. And I often ask the question about, well, why wouldn't you think about CAC or LTV? Which sort of gets to another question, which is, what would your business look like if you went to market as a technology company versus whatever business you think you're in? And that's something that we can maybe get back to later, but it's a question that we always like to ask. Yeah. But I think you're getting into some things there that I think are a really good segue into one of our favorite topics right now, which is RevOps, or revenue operations, which is when you were introduced to me, that was kind of the term of the discussion we were going to be having. And for those folks who are listening who might not be familiar with what revenue operations is, I wanted to just sort of explain a little bit more about that. And essentially what it is, it's bringing together the people in your revenue team. So when you say a revenue team, it's marketing, sales, and customer service are typically the revenue team. The processes that run across those three teams, and we'd like to think versus across around those three teams, how there's a circular handoff between marketing to sales to customer service and back to marketing, again, to drive CAC and LTV. And then what is the data that they're using? In other words, so you start with the highest level business objectives, but then marketing has metrics and data that they are measured on. Sales does, and the handoff between those two has to be clear. And then from sales to customer service or customer support or customer success, same deal. And one of the areas where businesses are seeing a lot of benefit as a competitive advantage really is so a lot of businesses today of a certain size will have marketing operations, they'll have sales operations, and they'll have customer service operations. Is they're bringing those three siloed or separate operations team and bringing them into one team, which we call revenue operations, where they are responsible for keeping the people, the processes, the data, and the technology systems that power and control that business's revenue engine. So with that said, even though you might not currently use the term RevOps or revenue operations at Alula, what would you say are some of the key ingredients to the success that your revenue team is seeing across sales, marketing, and customer service?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and it's we call them the front enders or the revenue team, so not too far off, and it really does comprise of sales, marketing. I'd throw product management in there as an element of it because there's such a big part of product marketing that ties into product management, and then certainly operations. But I think when you try to bring those pieces together, you can. There are a lot of challenges that pop up, right? A lot of companies, sales and marketing are like cats and dogs. They have disparate goals. They have disparate compensation systems. They don't share blame. They don't share accountability. They don't share the victories and together. So it's. I've seen it a lot of different ways in a lot of companies, and I think to me, what I've learned through the years, whether it's here or other places, is just comes down to having a shared goal. And what is it we want to do that may evolve year to year as you set up your annual plans, but making sure that your revenue team or your front enders have this shared purpose and shared goal that doesn't compete with each other. They can have individual slices of the pie to get there, but they've got to have a shared goal. And for us, for this year, it's 150,000 activations, and we want to get 150,000 activations on the new activations on our network, and we put that forward day one. Our battle cry behind it was light it up, because light them up on the network. So we basically said let's get this team to drive 150,000 activations, which was different than this business had ever really focused on before. And I think for us, it gave us a common sense of, okay, this is what we're after. This is our guiding light that we're going to drive towards. Then behind that, you've got obviously your common metrics and making sure that, sales is going to have a different metric than marketing, different than product management, more different than operations, but they all need to cascade into the overall revenue objective that you're driving towards. So I think the metrics, the alignment of those looking at those on a quarterly basis. We set up, quarterly rocks, quarterly objectives by group, and we work to cascade those down to the rest of the organization. We're, working to get better and better at that as a company. But, making sure that you've got the metrics behind the goals for each group that are aligned. And there's a heavy dose. It's probably 80-20. You may have 80% your own sales objectives or 20% aligned directly with marketing, but they all drive into this. For us, it was activations. How do we get there together? The third is the managed processes. And when I say managed by, tools, as you mentioned, whether it's data structures or, CRMs or, integrations to ERPs or others, having a common data set and an agreed upon nomenclature, but that feeds into the process that's managed properly, that's key, because otherwise people start to question, where'd you get the data? Well, that database is never right, or you can't believe what you get out of there, or, we don't define a win that way, we define it this way. You get all those arguments, it just leads to mistrust, it leads to, the blame game, it leads to a lot of breakdown. And so I think having that managed infrastructure that's the common across those teams is absolutely paramount, or it will break the first two. The last two are more, I guess, human. Heavy trust and collaboration is absolutely positively paramount. At one point in my career, I had a head of sales and a head of marketing. They were both incredible at what they did, but they didn't trust each other, they didn't collaborate. And I let it go on way too long. It was one of those early leader, early manager things that I thought I had, two A players, and each of them individually could win. And without the trust and collaboration, it completely broke down. And the teams around them broke down, and we failed. And that was a really key learning, that trust and the collaboration between your sales and your marketing, your operations, is absolutely paramount. And if they don't have that, find people who can get that, or lead better. Because if I'm not doing that, I'm not leading well enough to foster that, to trust and collaboration. And I guess the last piece, it does get down to leadership, right? Whether it's the CEO or the CMO or the components within the head of product management, the leaders have to step up to drive that. Because if it's lost at the team level, it's a leadership thing, right? If the individual product managers, the individual salespeople aren't aligned, that's a leadership issue. The coach needs to make sure that everybody knows the playbook when they're going on the field. And I think that leadership is so critical in these times where things are so chaotic. Things are changing so rapidly, and just because of the world we live in, that leadership element is absolutely paramount. So to set that direction, to make sure you've got the guiding light, and then you've got the infrastructure, you've invested in the infrastructure around that. And again, we're not perfect. We still have a long ways to go. I think it's a never-ending journey to continuously, make sure you've got the tools and you've got the collaboration. And the more challenging the problem is, the more I think it tests your leadership, and the more it tests that infrastructure. If that infrastructure, or if that leadership is fragile, it's going to break under pressure, right? It's easy to be a leader when you're winning all the time. It really is. It's when you lose, or it's when you are facing adversity, that's when, real leaders step up. And that's what I always look for in my top leaders, is how do they behave under pressure and under adversity. That to me is the sense and the type of leader I want around for a long time, if they can handle that. You never hope to lose as a regular outcome, but the outcome of losing can really test and help you measure, I think, a lot of the leadership and a lot of the trust and collaboration you have for the team. You see what points of that process or of that collaboration breaks down when you hit stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, we could dig into each one of those things in a lot more detail, and I hope we get the chance to do that at some other point. But to me, the one thing at the center, because again, I see all these parallels from what you were saying and everyone else that we speak to in our day-to-day business or just in general, and that is the resistance to change, right? So right from the leadership all the way down, through the different levels of management, et cetera. The single most difficult thing and the biggest resistance is always to that change. So, right. Because if you don't have that right team, to your point, and to me, one of at least in our space, one of the ingredients or aptitudes of those key people is that they in fact embrace change, which again, of course, we know statistically that there's fewer of people who embrace change than those who resist change. But to do this stuff, it's not easy, and it has to start at the highest level. And like what we've seen, as we've moved upstream, where we're now working with $500 billion plus companies in revenue, and we're now essentially selling to or working with the entire C-suite, because the technology that we're implementing runs across the entire company. So whoever's responsible for revenue, whether that's a CRO or a VP of sales and their marketing counterpart, but the CTO or the CIO is now involved, because again, technology runs through the entire business. And at the end of the day, the CEO, to your point, the highest leader has to be completely behind this, as does the operational leader, whether that's a president or a COO. And we're essentially having to, as they say, sell to all 6 or 7 of those folks in the C-suite now, because part of this adventure that they're about to go on is transformational, which means that there's going to be a lot of change. But the change is not. Again, the benefits are very clear if you have the vision to do so, and then the rest comes down to communication. And of course, a key part of that communication is trust, right? So this is all good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of those points. I mean, the difference between having a great leadership team and having an average leadership team is absolute night and day from a performance perspective, and from a leadership health perspective. This job becomes a whole lot more fulfilling and a whole lot more productive, obviously, if I can find the right leaders and empower those right leaders, and more importantly, if they step up. Right now, I'm very blessed to have a great leadership team, and it's amazing the difference, because you're focusing on beating the competition. You're focusing on servicing the customer. You're not focused on internal battles and all the circus tricks that can go on in a big company that are out there. It's night and day. And the one thing that I always try to, about once a quarter, do an inventory of how much time are we spending as a leadership team focused on the real issues of the business versus some of the internal BS that's out there. And even as a smaller company, because we're not a huge company, but you still end up with this internal these internal issues that you have to overcome, and they're real. Don't get me wrong, but if you're spending an inordinate amount of time on the internal, just solving all the internal problems, and you're not really solving the customer problems or innovating, that obviously is going to take you off the mark of taking down one of the industry gorillas that's out there. And the whole change management thing, I think you absolutely nailed it, and I think that's one of the key learnings too that I've had through the years, is that you can call together a room of people and say, okay, here, we're going to change, we're going to do this. And everybody's going to nod their head and say, yep, sounds great, perfect, we're there. And then the meeting after the meeting happens, right? And everything that you just agreed upon breaks down. And then 3 weeks later, are the behaviors matching what was agreed upon? Or did leadership change the decision that was made in that meeting? So now you break the trust of those that you communicated it to. So it's so important, I think, when you make those decisions, to really stand firm and make sure that ongoing that you've got that consistent look and feel of that change, and that you have complete buy-in for that. And if people are not acting in accordance with the change, then call them out. Even if it's a leader, call them out, and do it privately, publicly, whatever. I think that's a key part of this change management, is making sure that you've got very explicit and implicit acceptance of that change. I had a program manager I once worked with, and he had one of the best lines. He would put forth a date or a change. He would say, look around the room, and he'd say, silence is violent acceptance. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you're going to stay silent on this, that means you are violently, not just accepting, but you're violently accepting this change that we're making. And I always love that line, because so many people would be there, multitasking, doing other things. Oh yeah, sure, sounds good. Then they'd go back to their old ways. And I just think really getting that alignment for change is such an important part of it. again, you may disagree, you may agree, but you may agree to disagree. But I think the key is making sure you've got alignment, and the team can see that coming out of those change discussions going forward. Yeah,
and again, just in that communication piece, which of course is why change management is such a key piece of all of this, and because it really gets down to the knowledge that when you're doing anything for the first time, you don't have all the answers, right? So then bring in people who do have experience doing whatever it is, because even if it's just to help you with the communication piece, where as you're rolling something out that is so critical to the future of the business, here, so you make the announcement, but then you go deep, another 3 levels deeper. This is why we're doing this, and this is why we're doing this, and this is what you're going to experience, and it's going to take us 6 to 9 months, or just setting those sort of realistic expectations, I think are some pretty small but powerful things as part of this whole change management thing. That again, that we're seeing that most people just, when you do anything for the first time, you don't know what to do.
Right.
So ask for some help from someone who has done it before, and it's typically worth it. Especially when you're doing something that is really life-changing or mission-changing and will affect the future of the organization potentially. Anyhow, so moving on, make sure we get through on our time here. Brian, have you had any big wins this year at Alula that you're able to talk about?
Yeah, so we actually have. It's been through a very incredibly crazy year on supply chain, and obviously the impacts of COVID on the market, and obviously some of the other dynamics impacting the security market overall, just from an increase in demand and new entrants and others. We've had some really incredible wins. We've actually signed our largest customer, or brought our largest dealer on this year, and then we've also brought our largest dealer using our flagship Connect Plus product and panel customer this year. So 2 of our biggest wins both came this year. We feel like the last couple of years prior to this, we were just getting tuned up. We're getting the platform together, getting the team together, getting the infrastructure together, overcame some of the adversity, and we've had some really monumental wins. We've also entered a brand new market this year. We've entered the commercial fire market, which is, as you know, landing a new customer is one set of challenges, but entering a whole new market is a whole new set of challenges. And the team got incredibly aligned. The team set the objective, and we've been able to enter a new market. So we've had 3 really big wins this year that we're pleased with. And we have a lot of work left to go to make sure that everything's going well on all 3 fronts. But proud to say the team stepped up and delivered 3 huge wins this year.
Awesome. Yeah, congratulations. I mean, that's always big. So was there anything that was different about the wins that you had this year? Was there a big learning, I guess?
I think from the big dealers that we signed, I think probably the biggest learning and the biggest thing that we tried and successfully put in place, and I'll give a lot of credit to my head of sales and head of marketing and head of product management and head of operations, but really team selling and a team environment is these larger opportunities that you go after in the marketplace, especially if you're converting them over from something that's existing. It truly takes the whole team. It really requires, I think, a set of well-defined processes, well-defined touch points. From the first day that you touch that dealer with a marketing message, and then the 27 times that you hit them after that, to the time that you get your first sales meeting, all the way back to the point where they're evaluating your product, it's got to be orchestrated, right? And we really have tried to empower our sales team to be the quarterback, if you will, but then to provide account resources around that individual, whether it's executives, an executive sponsor, whether it's operational evaluation resources, whether it's a marketing addition to help the dealer market better. We tried to empower that quarterback with as many tools and capabilities. And we really tried to do that in each of these wins that we were able to provide and bring forward. And I think it's worked. The big question we've always had is this repeatable? Is this something that we can take to the rest of the large market, the national accounts, but then also bring it even down market? And so now a lot of our packaging that we're doing on the marketing and operations side, is really trying to say, how do we get this and make it repeatable? How can we take this intensive high-touch team selling approach and make it more systematic and repeatable across the rest of the markets. And that's a journey for us. But a lot of that gets back into the tools that you talked about before of having well-defined, data structures, contacts and touch points and project management. All those have to be very tightly integrated in order to really make sure that you can bring these whales down and bring them together for a key win.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Which actually sort of brings me to my next question, which is, we're now, of course, most of us are either in the middle of or wrapping up our Q4, our planning for next year, annual planning. And this is at a time of the year where we and everybody else, of course, thinks about sort of innovation as we think more strategically for the next year, 3 years, 5 years. Is there something innovative you're going to be doing at Alula in 2022 that you're excited about and can share?
Yeah, so I think two big things. One is we have actually just launched last week our fire communicator, which gets us into the commercial fire and commercial bird industry. Really the marketplace that we've served historically have been dealers who work with residential type of setups, whether it's home automation or security. We're now moving into this commercial fire and small business intrusion space. And for us, we're launching a whole set of new capabilities that allow us to do it. So it's part product, part architecture, part messaging, and then everything that goes behind it. We've got to have the right dealer tools, and we've got to have the right system tools. We've got to have the right databases. We've got to have the right approach. We've got to make sure the team is well tuned to be able to go after a slightly different market that's out there. So for us, our big innovation is going to be, it was really started last week with our fire communicator, but now it's going to transcend us into this SMB space, in addition to the residential space that we've historically been in. And we think we can use the same platform to hit multiple spaces, which gives us a huge architectural and efficiency advantage on the platform side. But as you know, the front end, is just as tough as sometimes building out the products. And the front end for us really looks different when you're supporting a commercial integrator or a fire integrator than maybe it does a residential dealer. And for us, it's really kind of transforming our knowledge, the knowledge bases, the installation manuals, the dealer marketing tools. All these things have to get up to speed in terms of how we can shift this, 1 degree to the right in terms of our market focus. The reason we're doing that is, again, market diversification, bigger addressable market, bigger TAM size, but it's a very logical place for us to be. A lot of our customers have asked us to go there because they may sell residential and small business security services. So it's a pretty logical path. I wouldn't call it something that we just had a brainchild one day and we decided to go there. The market, in some ways, we felt the gravitational pull of the SMB market, but it's really, for us, it's about what are the right set of tools that we can go to battle with going forward, and that's what we're working quite heavily on right now.
Right. Okay. As you were talking there, Brian, I was thinking about the challenges that it might just be ego or whatever, but when you're in the B2B space, like you are, so a lot of folks might not realize how the size and extent of Alula's products, because again, the market isn't really seeing they're not seeing Alula as the brand, correct?
Right, correct.
So, how many dealers do you have countrywide as a metro?
5,000, over 5,000.
Yeah. So each metro would have multiple dealers. Okay.
Correct. Yes.
So no matter where in the country you are, you have multiple dealers in your area, but so you might know their names, but you won't know the Alula name.
And that's what we want, right? And some of our competitors have actually put their brand in front of our partners, and our partners aren't exactly the fondest of that because, ultimately, we don't ever want to compete with our dealers. It's one of those channel conflict strategy discussions that you continuously have. I get asked all the time, why aren't you going directly to the end users? And I've said we will never ever go directly to the end user. Alula will not go directly to the end user. Why? Because we serve the channel, and you can't do justice to the channel and compete with them at the same time. We live, eat, drink, sleep, our partners, our dealers. How can we help them get more revenue? How can we help them, become more efficient? That's what we need to be focusing on, not how we're going to compete with them. So for us, it's once you have that guiding light, that this is what we're doing, guys. This is our focus, and it's been that way since day one. So it's not been like that's a big change for the company, but we've really had to stay steadfast in that. And behind that, to your earlier point, is we don't really want end users to know who Alula is. We don't want them to know who our dealer is. So we want to give them a fully branded app on the phone. We want to give them a fully branded experience on the touchpad in their home. Not Alula, but Joe's Security. That's really who we want to make successful through our journey here.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that because when I first met you, it's like you're a very decent sized company, but it's like why haven't I heard of you? And I'm guessing a lot of people listening are probably thinking the same thing. That so they might know some of the 800-pound gorillas in your space because again they lead with their brand, whereas you lead through your 5,000 dealers, which again to me makes a lot of sense because you're putting the customer at the center, which is essentially what RevOps is all about. It's the flywheel approach where the center is the customer, and you build your business processes and teams around the customer. Yep. So that makes total sense. So Brian, as we sort of start to wrap up here, you don't have to look very hard to realize that large technology or SaaS companies have come from almost nowhere 20 years ago, and this is kind of what I was starting to allude to earlier. Where these technology and SaaS companies are now replacing their traditional counterparts, whether it's the industry, like oil and gas or whatever. That's maybe not a good example of, but those were the biggest companies on the stock exchange 20 years ago, and other brick and mortar industries. Now, the biggest companies on the stock exchange are all technology companies, and will be increasingly so. When I say all, it's the stock market is now predominantly technology companies that are just growing at incredible paces. We've all heard, Amazon, Google, Uber, etc., but there are many other technology companies. Do you think more traditional businesses have anything to lose by going to market and thinking like technology companies?
I think it depends. So I don't think it's a blanket, yes, everything's great about tech and everybody should become a tech company, because I think there are a lot of great things about technology companies. There are a lot of bad things about technology companies. A lot of technology startups fail. As we know, the vast majority, 80, 90% fail. So I think it depends maybe on two things. One is what's the purpose of the business, and what kind of guides the business? Are you a growth revenue company? Are you a highly profitable operational efficiency, just crank out the EBITDA type of company? Are you there for a nonprofit? I mean, what are the elements of your business that are driving you, going forward? I think the technology companies tend to be more growth-oriented, not in all cases, but in many cases more growth-oriented, and are going to have that as their forces. How do we grow the business, and then bring scaling along? Whereas maybe a traditional manufacturing business or others may say, how do we scale this from day one, and then growth can be an afterthought. So I think you have to ask, what is the purpose, and what's that guiding light for the business, and it may not always fit the tech principles. And I think the second one it depends upon is speed. One of the elements of, I think, tech startups in particular is they tend to move faster than a lot of businesses, right? The whole tech revolution, things move faster, fail faster. That the whole mantras that are out there. We say move at the speed of a startup. We've got to consistently make decisions, have a bias towards action, move at the speed of a startup as much as we possibly can. And we call it let's be scrappy, right? Our competitors, even though they're in tech, are big and slow. And if we can move quickly without the bureaucracy and without some of the second guessing of everything, we can really garner the goodness of being a tech startup. But you take the first letter off of scrappy and what do you get, right? You get crappy. Yeah. So how do you be scrappy and move fast without being sloppy and crappy? That's the piece that that we constantly try to reiterate is that being scrappy doesn't mean that you can be sloppy or that we can be careless or that we can miss things. It just means that we have to be smarter about the processes we put in place. We have to have that bias towards action. We're going to try things. We can't be afraid to make some mistakes, but we have to manage the outcomes of the mistakes when they happen. And over time, good things will happen because we're going to move and we're going to try more things. We're going to measure. On the marketing side, we're going to test something, we're going to measure it, and we're going to adapt it. And we're going to continuously do that. We're not just going to try one thing over a year, right? We're going to try multiple things and see if they work. Always have the measurement infrastructure behind it. And then if it's not working, then let's try something different. So I think it really does depend upon the willingness for speed, the aptitude to move quickly, but also, what is really the purpose behind the business. And in most cases, I think tech principles can help influence a business. I think in a lot of ways, though, traditional businesses there's a lot of good things about those that a tech business can learn from. Sometimes the pendulum can go too far into the tech sphere where you're almost in la-la land, right? And the principles of business back in the 10, 15 to 20 years ago, we lost some of the fundamentals of business. And I think we had to swing back that, there's certain things that really do matter. In most cases, profitability do matter. In most cases, cash management do matter. These principles do matter. The human element, right? Mm-hmm. People need work-life balance. These things have been there forever. I think we brought that back as a tech community a little bit more into a sane level, and now we're at a pretty good equilibrium, I think, in the marketplace.
Yeah. No, and of course you're absolutely right, because and I think the one other thing, in addition to what you said, is if high growth is not critical, then obviously don't make any changes that you don't need to make.
Right.
I should probably have prefaced it by saying, if anyone is in high growth mode, in other words, they're growing by at least 25% per year, or want to or need to over the next 5 to 10 years, I think then that's maybe when it becomes more usable to use that sort of tech approach. But in addition to those 4 staples that you mentioned. So thanks so much.
Yeah, no, and I think an agile mentality, right? The key process in software, and certainly in the much more of a high-tech business is going to be agile. Agile is all about iterations, right? And it's about breaking down the work into bite-sized pieces that can be adapted and can be iterated. And I think that applies not only to software development, but applies to decision-making as well. We should all have 3-year horizon plans, but let's break it down into something that can be agile, that can be adapted without being chaotic, right? You don't want to whipsaw your teams, but you have to be able to adapt a plan in an agile manner, yet still hold yourself accountable. That's the I think the balancing act between maybe tech and non-tech as well.
Yeah, it's funny because that's one of the things I was thinking as you were explaining this earlier, that the one thing that using agile, for example, when you've tried something that didn't work, a lot of, let's say, more traditional companies will just say, oh, that didn't work, and let's try the next thing. Whereas in agile, you're almost forced to go back and do a post-mortem and say, well, why didn't that work?
Right.
If we tweaked a few things, could it work? What is the data telling us? You still see, way too often, so, oh, we tried that 3 years ago. It's yeah. Do you think it might work today?
Right. Maybe you didn't try it the right way. Change 1 or 2 elements of the mix and then try it again, right? It doesn't mean that the entire strategy was bad. Maybe try it a slightly different way. But you're right. You're exactly right. Especially as you get new leadership and new regimes come in. Oh, the failed leadership of the past. Let's try something brand new. Well, maybe you just need to tweak some things. And again, iterate those, like you're saying.
Yeah, and before I ask you the last question to wrap up, one of the quotes that we use a lot around here is, "What got us here isn't going to get us to where we're going." But just in the last sort of 6 to 9 months, I've sort of been diving into this whole RevOps topic. I've sort of added my own piece to that, which is just because something didn't work on the way to getting us here doesn't mean it's not going to work as we go forward. So it's kind of that same piece. You have to look at you have to look at both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Brian, again, so the last question to wrap up here: what is your one wish for the businesses out there that you feel will help them grow better in 2022?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing that I've learned through the years that as you look at your planning into the coming years, look for the fault lines, and what are the fault lines in an industry? And again, most of my career I spent the smaller, mid-sized guy trying to bring down bigger companies. So this may not apply. Well, I guess it does apply to a bigger company if you want to remain relevant. But for us, for small, mid-sized, high-growth businesses, it's look for those fault lines. And I think there are more fault lines than ever right now because everything is changing, right? Workforce dynamics are changing. How you interact with customers is changing. Supply chain has never been this chaotic. There's so much chaos in the world. It's a terrible thing on one side. On the other side, there's so many new fault lines to try to go after and either cure or exploit, right? And change. And just so for us, we're looking for those fault lines in our space, and I encourage anybody to do that in 22 is where are the fault lines in your industry or the adjacent industries where you can take your systems, methods, processes, products and exploit. And to me, right now is the best time to find those because I don't think that there's been as many fault lines existing out there right now in the last 10 years, 20 years as there is right now in the space. It's because of the chaos that's in the world.
Right. So I'm not familiar with that sort of that fault line terminology. Can you maybe just explain a little bit more? Because I know you and I, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about, I mentioned to you blue ocean strategy, which when you, as you were talking about fault lines, I'm like, well, is there some similarity there where you're looking at some of the gaps?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the earlier translation, methodology. I think that was a great example many years ago of the team looking for industry fault lines, right? They could have come in and said, well, let's take down the big guys by doing exactly what they do. We're going to introduce a brand new security system. We're going to go to every dealer and have a dealer go to end consumers and say, why don't you pull all the security system out and put the brand new one in? Well, what they realized was that was problematic. So the problem led to, okay, what are the fault lines? The fault lines that exist around that are, there is a way technically to be able to translate your existing system into a new system. Well, that's a fault line outside of the norm. The norm, I guess, if I look at it and say the norm is the way that the industry is currently solving the problems of the end user or the distributor, whatever it might be. The fault lines are what are the things around the edges where you can solve it in a slightly different way. I don't want to use the word disruption because it's so overused. But I think it's how do we solve that same problem in a slightly different way that nobody's gone to because of channel or cost or technology. But it's not radically flipping everything upside down. It's maybe going 1 or 2 degrees of separation around the edges and then start to exploit those. And you start with a few customers and then you start to build on it. Now, again, we have 5,000 customers. About 3,000 of those are using our translation tools for capabilities that were seen as the fault line many years ago. We've got a couple more of those that we're going after this year. I won't talk about those in great detail, but that are looking at how do we solve the problem slightly differently, not radically, because radical reinvention, yes, we all want that, but how rare that happens, right? And if you plan on that every year, to radically reinvent your industry every year, I'd say you'll never have the capital to be able to do it. So how do you find that 1 degree over that you do things, make a tweak, make a twist to solve a similar problem? That to me is a fault line. And that's what I've seen work time and time again. And again, the guys here solved it long before I got here. So we've been able to parlay that into some new things as well.
Great, yeah, I love that analogy, and I'm definitely going to think about it a little bit more. So thanks for sharing that, Brian. And do you have a couple more minutes?
I do, yes.
Yeah. So I guess the one question I wanted to make sure I still asked you, which was, so again, to sort of to wrap up for those folks listening who might be interested in fault lines or any of the other things that you're doing or thinking about. What are your favorite or go-to books, operating models, or resources that you feel have helped make Alula a better company, since you've been there?
Yeah, I think the the go-to classics certainly are, Crossing the Chasm has always been one of my favorites. From an operating model, traction and really developing an EOS or an entrepreneur's operating system within the business is great for small, mid-sized businesses. Even if you implement pieces of it, I think it really gives an operating model for businesses to be able to drive towards more scale. You mentioned the Blue Ocean series have always been some of my favorites. Newer books by Sunil Gupta is a really great book in terms of how to take what you're doing and make it backable, whether it's for investment purposes or even to the marketplace. It's a really well thought out, well disciplined approach. And then from a personal development, Atomic Habits, it's a newer book as well. I think we all have developed some really good habits and maybe some bad habits through these lockdowns and other craziness that we have in the world. And for me, I've found it refreshing to go back and say, okay, how do I make sure that I'm building the right habits going forward? Because habits can change over time. So for me, it's about, okay, how do I make sure that I'm building and keeping the good habits and breaking the bad ones as a human? And those are just some of the best books that I've had a chance to read.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And of course, Traction, we've been following, Traction in the EOS now for going on 8 years, and it's definitely been very helpful to us. Again, once you've got your strategy figured out, it's a really good, very simple methodology that, with the sort of daily, weekly, quarterly, and annual cadence has been, I would say, game changing for us too, like I know for many others.
Yeah, there's how many strategies do we all know that were wonderful when you talked about them in the meeting and you laid out the PowerPoint and you all agreed upon them, and then 6 months later, a year later, how many of those actually got executed, implemented, and successfully are aligned today? It's a very small percentage, right? So I think that execution piece is so critical. And the alignment piece, the alignment aspect is something I would not say we are a great Traction user. I think we are a good and getting much better, and we need to get much better at it just to make sure that we can have that alignment process across the team. We're talking a lot, in 22 about making sure we've got the alignment of the objectives and just get people wrapped around a rally cry and get them excited about what we're doing again, especially with, so many new remote employees and new employees as we grow and others. It's just, that alignment is so critical in these times. So I think there's a lot of great principles in there that touch on all aspects of a small, mid-sized business.
Absolutely. And for me, one of the biggest ones was the accountability piece. And to your point, a lot of that might be changing now because you have to think that accountability is changing in a lot of businesses right now. And maybe it's time to sort of revisit that, especially with more people working from home, et cetera. But still maintaining that accountability is a critical piece. And I think Traction's a great way to keep everybody aligned around their accountabilities. Brian, thanks again so much. I look forward to digging into. I've made a lot of notes here, and I'd love to talk to you, more about these again when we meet again. But thanks for being on RevOps Champions, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks for the opportunity, Brendon.
Thank you for checking out this episode of RevOps Champions. This show is powered by Dynamico, a HubSpot consulting firm helping businesses level up the technology systems that power their ability to scale. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow RevOps Champions wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Or visit RevOpsChampions.com to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.